I am so thrilled to be able to honor our next honoree, Dame Stephanie Shirley. Dame Stephanie is being honored tonight for her role in the creation of a pioneering all-woman programming company in the early 1960s. Think about that, the early 1960s. And for a lifetime of promoting computing in the UK. Her story starts in World War II as well, where young Stephanie Shirley was an unaccompanied child refugee, an experience that deeply affected her adult life. As a young woman trained in math and physics, she started a company in 1962 called Freelance Programmers in the UK. It was built intentionally to be of women and for women. At that time, women were widely viewed as unsuitable for technical work. In the early years, she even had to take and use the name Steve so that people would respond to her letters. Shirley's goal was to tap into a vast reservoir of women, often who were at home caring for their young children, who had some spare time and actually had the skills to incorporate programming into their daily lives. By 1975, the company had 300 employees, and all but 3 were women. All but 3 were women back in early 1960s. She was so far ahead of her time. Shirley sold much of her interest in the company to staff, and it went public in 1996. She has since devoted her life to supporting IT projects such as the Oxford Internet Institute, and currently she directs all of her time in philanthropy to support research into autistic spectrum disorders. Tonight, we honor Dame Stephanie Shirley and present a short film where she shares her contributions to computing.
Early trauma affects a person and affects their life. I was an unaccompanied child refugee, and that experience has really driven my life. It is as strong today as it was 75 years ago. I became really very conscious that how lucky I was to be saved from Nazi Europe, how fortunate I was compared with 1.5 million children who were killed during that time, and made me very driven. Each day has got to be worthwhile. I've got to do something better today than I did yesterday. I became a learning person. I'm a perfectionist. I think all these things stem from the insecurity of a traumatic childhood. The shortage of money certainly drove me to sort of say, I'm going to get into work, I'm going to be self-contained, I'm going to earn my own money. And so I went for a job as a sort of junior mathematical clerk, but in a very fine place. It was the post office research station, a very fine quality. There were about 200 graduates there, quite a reputation worldwide. And so I started right at the bottom there and loved it. Because I'm so marketing oriented, you will expect me to sort of say that the private sector was more female friendly. In fact, I found it was the public sector because it was all structured and rules so that nobody could sort of say I couldn't do this if the rule book said that I could. In my generation of women, there were lots of things that you couldn't do. My job actually would have entailed me going onto a cable laying ship, and I couldn't do that. Women just did not go on working ships. I could write software for the London Stock Exchange, but I couldn't actually work there myself. My business was very special. It was a woman's company in the computer industry. My company was originally called Freelance Programmers. 297 of the first 300 staff were all women. I mean, it was really a female-friendly organisation. It was set up as a crusade rather than to make money, and indeed it took a long time before it did make any money. And I was very proud eventually, when it succeeded, that I'd set up this special women's company. This is what we remember, this is how we recruited, this is what we were. An early project was to develop software standards, sort of management control protocols. And eventually those standards were adopted by NATO. Another big one was for the black box flight recorder for supersonic Concorde. Programming began to be synonymous with coding, and so we moved to include systems analysis, set up a new company that just did systems and consultancy and started moving up there. So much of one's life is spent working that when it is a joy and a pleasure, I could never believe that I should be paid so well for doing something that I enjoyed so much. And that's how work should be, and it can be in the technical world.
The 2018 Computer History Museum Fellow Award is presented to Dame Stephanie Shirley for a lifetime of entrepreneurship, promoting the growth of the UK software industry and advancement of women in computing. Unfortunately, Dame Stephanie could not be with us this evening, but here to accept the award on her behalf is her very close friend, Roberta Estacio.
Going to love that. Steve, I think I call Dame Stephanie Steve because that is her name. She is so honored to be honored by you all. She's in her middle 80s. Her husband's 95 and doing very, very well. But to get on an airplane to come out here, which she wanted to do so desperately, she just really couldn't do it. But she knows that if, Roberta, will you do this for me, please? Because she knows that she's here with me, okay? And I'll be able to tell her all the incredible people that have been here tonight and the things that you've said about her, those of you who have known her. I will communicate that to her, and she will be so happy. She will be so happy. And soon, you might have seen that book in the film called Let It Go. She wrote that about a few years ago, and Hollywood came along. They found her too, and they are making a full-length feature film and get that story. And get her story out everywhere, because, I'm sorry, the first person who talked tonight about women, I thought that was really great. But now we need those models, and those models have to be out there, and it should just be, yeah, she's a woman, so what, She's running a company. The one thing when I first met her, and I met her 20 years ago, we were both on the BBC together. I was in New York and she was in London, and we didn't know each other yet, but as soon as I heard her talking, and she said, as soon as she heard me talking, that we had to be together and really get to know each other. So next time I was in London, we did, and we've been working together ever since. She's also highly she invests in women's companies. She's invested in mine over the many years, and that's another big need in this community. The one thing that really got to me when I met her is she said that when she first started the company, when she had to go to the bank, like in the late 50s, maybe early 1960, her husband had to sign the permission for her to open a business account, okay? And I thought that was crazy, but she did it, and even if her husband didn't sign it, of course he did, she would have figured out a way to get it done, and that's her. She works and works and works and works, and she never stops. And I have learned so much from her, and again, I thank you so, so much, and I will tell her everything about you all. Thank you.